Hello and welcome to the Community Show. I'm Hari Berzins and I'm here with Ricky Cox out in Indian Valley. And we are thrilled to be here with you to learn about the milling and the whole process of grinding corn today.
Okay. Well, what we're talking about today is a type of mill that's distinct from the big water-powered mills. Some of you you did a program about that.
Yes.
And they're easy to spot because naturally they're built by a reasonably large stream. And the mills are purpose-built. The height of them, the way they're laid out kind of identifies them as a mill. But in the 1920s, here in Floyd County, another type of mill was brought in to be used with a steam engine, and a few were. The steam engines were never very popular in Floyd County. We kind of skipped that era. We went straight to gasoline and electricity because steam engines are large and expensive and hard to move around. You can't farm. You can farm Illinois with the steam engine, but not Floyd County. So about the time that automobiles had been here long enough to be junked, so there was an engine to salvage, people began to purchase mills like this one here, and you'll see that a little bit later and learn more about it. But that mill was made in the 20s, probably early 20s, before 1924, in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, by the Williams Company, and eventually a company that still exists called the Meadows Mill Company bought all its local competitors and produced many thousands of mills like this that were set up in little crossroads stores. Store owners would buy them, then they could grind corn for their customers, and individuals bought them to grind for themselves and their neighbors, and people who made liquor bought them because they could grind their own cornmeal that they needed without raising the suspicion about carrying lots of corn, more corn than their families could possibly eat, to the mill to be ground for that purpose. So they were immensely popular, but they are almost unknown because, as I was saying, the buildings they were put in, and they were not used outside. I've got this outside because I've taken it to shows and things, and I just don't. It should be inside a building, permanently fastened down. But the building it would have been in there'd be nothing really special about it. The building, if you see the mailbox there, I don't know if you can get that later, but there's a building right there. That building was built in the 1930s to house a mill like that. But the only way you know it is if you walked around the building and looked at it very carefully. There's about a 3-inch hole in the other end where the exhaust pipe came out, because there was an old car motor was in there, and it operated a mill like that. And on this end of the building, there's a bench built along the wall where the customers could sit and talk while they were waiting to have their corn ground. So the buildings that house this type of mill, they're hard to identify. They're easy to adapt to some other purpose. They're not especially valuable. Many of them are knocked down, torn down, burned down. They were typically built sort of parallel to the way that the water power mills were built next to a stream and inherently at risk of being washed away. They're in a floodplain. These mills were always built next to a road, and they were typically built by little dirt roads, gravel roads, and as the roads get widened, they disappear, they get knocked down. But they were all over the county. Probably, this is not based on any really careful evidence, but I don't think I'd go far wrong to say that there were as many of those as there were one-room schools, because it's basically the same thing. People need one of those within walking distance. So
It'd be hard to carry a whole bag of corn
yeah.
very far.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And people would go to the big mills. You take a wagon, you load up wheat, and you go and you get several hundred pounds ground. Wheat lasts longer. Flour lasts longer. Whole corn ground, especially in the summer, it will go bad. It's got oil in it, and it won't keep. So people would go once or even once a week, maybe a couple of times a month, every 2 weeks, and they would put a kid on a horse and take a big long sack and tie it up, and then divide the corn so that half hangs on this side and half hangs on this side, and you put the child on the horse and the sack of corn there with them, and send them off to the mill. And if they're not big enough, the miller gets them off the horse and the corn and puts it back on for them, and they just hope nothing falls off in the meantime. So, or anyone, a grown man could carry, it was called a turn of corn. I'm going to take a turn of corn to the mill, and very typically it would be a half a bushel, which is 28 pounds, which would not have been a load for a grown man, but it would be, to carry it very far. So in walking distance. So there were lots of those. And I did a survey back in the 80s and talked to some old folks, and there was one right there, and I've got a map somewhere I marked on them. There were, I could think about it and name 10 within 5 miles of here pretty easily. Not all at the same time, but between 1920 and 1960 or something like that. So they were pretty common, but they're not heard of today.
And was the corn milling, the building or the place where the people sit, did this become a gathering place?
Yeah.
Or what kind of things would happen while you're waiting for your corn?
Well, it would be the same as at a big mill. My uncle, who was raised here, his dad, my grandfather, died in 1939 when my uncle would have been, he was born in 16 years old. And briefly, he took over milling once a week. These things, instead of being open every day, they'd be open one day a week. Friday or Saturday, you'd know to come, and you'd sit and talk while you waited for your turn. And my dad's brother, who was 16 when his dad died in 1939, and that building there was put up in around 37, 38, something like that, to grind corn for the neighbors and himself, because he didn't farm. My grandfather had lost a leg in the mines in West Virginia, so he wasn't able to farm. So one of the things he did to make a living was he put up that mill and he'd grind corn for the neighbors. And you didn't get any money. What you got was a portion of the corn. You got toll. No money changes hands. There's no money box in there. You have a little square box that's made especially to hold exactly a half a gallon or a gallon. So from a gallon, let's see, a bushel of grain, people would bring a half bushel, I was telling you that. So you would get a half a gallon, 1/8 would be the toll that the miller gets. So if 8 people came, you'd have a half a bushel. So that would, that would be corn you didn't have to raise yourself. So it was an investment and a return, but no cash for your mill. So anyway, my uncle took over milling briefly, and he said that the neighbors would come, and sometimes they'd have corn, and sometimes they wouldn't. They just wanted to talk. And he got tired of hearing they were, not his peers or contemporaries, and he wasn't very much interested in what they had to say. And he said they told lies, and he didn't mind that they told lies, but he got tired of hearing the same lies over and over again.
We need to come up with some new lies.
Yeah, just at least get a new lie if you're going to come and tell a lie. Tall tales, I guess.
Yeah.
We were talking before we began about who would remember this, and I was telling you that I started to say people who are 60, but that's not right, because I'm over 60. But when Frank began working on that book on Floyd County Mills back in the 80s. I met him in 92, and he had talked to a lot of people already, and we talked to people together, and I continued to talk to people until 2010. Even as recently as 10 years ago, there were a lot of people who had stories about going to the mill, who could remember about that, and some of them were funny, about taking the horse and the sack fell off and they had to figure out how to get it back on. And some of them were talked about how busy their parents were, and they were proud to be trusted to to do that. That was a big to get to go to the mill by yourself was a big kind of a milestone kind of thing. But I'm just I don't know how many people are left, but there are people who certainly eat cornbread and like the meal. Years ago, and maybe still today, I'd meet people I used to take this thing to Ferrum, and there would be people who want to feel it because the home ground meal is typically more coarse than what you get today. The stuff in the stores today, to me, it's like flour, it's like cake, and the cornbread's like cake. And if I want cake, I want cake. I don't want cornbread to be like cake. So.
So I know that thicker or that coarser grind as stone ground.
Well, stone ground is a thing that we could go into that. I don't know how cornmeal is made in the really big commercial operations, but I have family who run a good sized regional mill in Booneville, North Carolina, and they still grind with a mill like that. You can buy a mill like that today. You can go down to North Wilkesboro and get a mill just like that, except it's in a metal case. And so the principle is the same, and it does have stones inside of it. It is stone ground. And I'm told that the reason you want cornmeal to be stone ground is that if you use metal, that will get hot, and producing it at commercial rates and commercial volumes, it'll get so hot that it'll scorch your cornmeal and it'll ruin it. It won't taste good anymore. So stone ground is it's a marketing thing, but I don't know if the product's really any different, but it's good, and it's still feasible to grind corn on stones, whereas flour is no longer ground on stones. It's ground with what's called a roller
So
mill.
in this, could we walk down here?
Yeah, sure.
So is there a stone inside?
Yeah,
of this?
and you can actually look in the end. I left the end open here. But what we'll do, Fox, if you all have time, when we're going to grind 50 pounds, I'll pull the mill open, and you can see what the stones look like inside. And we'll see exactly how it works. But there is a stone set and embedded in concrete, and this thing comes apart, and we'll see that right up along that line. It just slides apart, and you can see exactly how it works. And it is stone ground, and that does mean something. If you're buying something that says stone ground, I would pick stone ground over whatever the alternative is, metal. When it says water ground, that sounds good, but it really doesn't change the product. It could be nuclear ground, and it wouldn't change the quality necessarily of what you're eating. But stone ground does make a difference.
So you're grinding quite a bit today, and will this all be for your family, or what will you do with the
I'll just
corn?
give it to people.
Okay.
And I'm not making liquor with it. I met a guy.
I wasn't implying that.
Well, I met a guy one time at a mill workshop about milling, and he said that he lived in. Well, I won't say where he lived because I don't want to be perpetuating any stereotypes. But anyway, he said these two guys showed up with a pickup truck, a full-size pickup truck with an 8-foot bed, and it was heaped over with yellow corn, and it had snow on it. And he said to them, "Well, you know, I'll grind this for you, but it's going to be a little bit damp, and you need to get it in the. You need to dry it out or do something with it because it won't keep very well." And they said, that'll be okay. And so he ground it, and he said, what are you doing with all this corn? And he said, the guy said, big family. And that's all it said. But he knew that wasn't. He didn't ask any more questions. But
I didn't realize that was that type of question. I was truly curious.
Well, we give it away. It's not hard to give it away, and especially people who remember the old timey and who aren't bothered by having to mix it. If you want the self-rising and don't want to mix a few ingredients, then this isn't for you. But we we really think it tastes better, and we really like it. And I know some folks, some older, some my age, some, well, I'm older now, and some younger people who taste the difference, and it's worth the aggravation. So
You
we're going to,
imagine it stays on the shelf in the grocery store for quite a while, so you're not going to have something quite so fresh.
Well, that's
Yeah.
right, and I don't, I don't want to cast aspersions there, but we have the folk beliefs that things in the stores aren't as good. Homemade is better, and that's true with some things like green beans. You can't. It's hard to get good green beans in the store. But cornmeal, and I haven't studied this very carefully, but some cornmeal I know has the heart removed, and I can't even show you the heart here, but I'll get a grain out here. This would be this part nearest where it comes off the cob. That's the heart, and that's where the oil is. If you go and find an ear of corn that have bugs have gotten to it, and it's still on the ear, if you look at it, you'll see a little tiny hole. Now I could have brought one, but there'll just be a little tiny hole bored right in that end where they can get to it, and they don't eat that part. They go to that, and if you find some grains of corn where mice have gotten at it, they start right here. And I guess if they're really hungry and that's a hard time for mice, they'd eat the whole thing, but having their preference, they just eat the heart, that part right there. And that's where the oil is, and that's where all the taste is. And commercial producers, and I'm not running them down, but one thing you can do to improve the shelf life of cornmeal is to take that out, because that oil, especially in the summer, will become rancid.
Ah.
And if you get really fresh whole cornmeal and put it in a paper bag, it'll get little greasy spots on it where that oil is. But that will shorten the shelf life. Plus, if you take the little heart out, crack it and take the heart out, you can extract the corn oil out of that and sell that for another product. But you're just leaving the starch. So that's one reason this would taste a little bit better, and it certainly is fresher.
And that's a reason to grind your own. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and it does taste better, I think. But
and so you're sharing with friends, and you're keeping it to use it for your family. And how long will what you grind today keep for?
My wife, we ground yesterday and started, and my wife made some cornbread, tasted great. But the night before, I had her to do that because my buddy that was helping me grind, I wanted him to like it. He helped me grind all day, so she made cornbread. But 2 days before, she had made cornbread that we ground from meal ground in August 2017, and it tasted about the same.
Okay.
You got to freeze it.
Oh, okay.
Put
Keep
it
it in the freezer.
Yeah, but it doesn't freeze. You don't have to thaw it, but and it keeps really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great tip to keep your cornmeal in the freezer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have corn, and another thing too, if you have fresh ground cornmeal like this, it's probably going to get bugs in it, and that is no disgrace to the miller or the producer of the corn. It's just a fact of nature. Anything that's out there, something wants to eat it.
Yeah.
And no matter what they do, short of doing some intensely chemical treatment, eventually the bugs are going to show up, and that's another reason to keep it in the freezer. So I've never had bugs to show up, but if they did, it wouldn't surprise me, and it wouldn't bother me either, because I know that it's good enough for the bugs.
That's right.
It's good enough for me too.
Yeah.
And that's another reason that people went to the mills very frequently years ago. They ate a lot more. They ate a lot of corn, probably more than they did flour. Shouldn't say that, but they ate a lot of corn, and especially in the summer, it wouldn't keep very long. So, and that's another reason these little small mills were scattered throughout the county, sort of like analogous to a little clinic and a hospital, or multiple elementary schools and one high school. So it's sort of a central thing for the big jobs or the infrequent things, but for just a little cornmeal, walk up the creek or across the hill or whatever to your neighbors. And back when we were talking about this in the 80s and 90s, talked to many people who remembered walking or seeing people walk past their house and they stop and talk and that turn of corn over their shoulder in a sack and walk for miles sometimes, and just what just what they did. I guess they were hungry when they got that cornbread made too.
And back then, the corn would have been something that they had also grown.
Yes, yeah, and that's an important thing to point out. There'll be people in Floyd County now who've come here from other places where yellow corn was preferred, and I can't give you a number, but I wouldn't be surprised if 96% of the corn that's grown in the United States today is probably yellow corn. It's all just a few specific hybrid varieties that are made by giant seed corporations to produce corn that's the same height and it gets ripe at the same time and it's got certain qualities that have been bred into it. So there are thousands of varieties of corn that I don't know how many still exist, but there have been thousands of varieties, but only a handful are produced commercially, and most of them are yellow, and most of it goes to feed cattle. Whereas in the 30s and 40s, I don't know where the breaking point was, but in the heyday of these things, which would have been the 30s and the 40s, people grew white corn just for their, and they had to have two fields. You have a field of yellow corn, and you have to separate them far enough that they won't cross-pollinate, because the white corn that they were growing was open-pollinated. And you know about these things.
Yes.
And you know, I don't know what the distance is, but pollen can.
Yeah.
And then people are getting into that too with the GMO things, because it's getting into somebody's field and they're claiming that they've stolen or something. I don't know much about that, but it seems really sad and bizarre to me.
Right. Something that's is nature-based.
Yeah.
We can't really control all of that.
But people want to.
They want to.
And they want to. I mean, you have to make a living and a reasonable profit, but we won't go down that path.
Yeah.
Because that's not what we're talking about. But in the 30s and 40s, people did grow their own corn, and there probably were people who ate yellow, but everyone I've talked to from Floyd County, they grew exclusively white corn to make cornmeal.
Yellow for their livestock?
That
white
came
for
in,
their...
yeah. At one time, it was all white.
Okay.
But and I'll get in trouble here. You need an ag teacher to tell you about this, but I'm guessing in the 20s, as things began to open up, roads got better, people began to have commercial fertilizers, then yellow corns, of course, have existed in parallel for centuries, but they became more popular here, and gradually they edged out the white as people began to. It was just too much trouble to have two patches of corn and keep them separate. And a fellow told me an interesting comment. He said that I asked him why did people stop doing that, and one obvious reason is just so much work.
Yeah.
And for the difference, go to the corn store and buy it, and it's maybe it's not quite as good, but it's not worth all that work.
Yeah.
But he said that as people began to grow more and more corn, yellow corn, for silage that came in, and they began to spray it with. And this is another thing. You'll have people, if anyone watches this, you'll have people who remember hoeing corn. They'll be my age or a little older, 3 times every summer, and that was for summer. It wasn't going to swimming lessons or the beach. It was hoeing corn. And
so what did that mean? What was that like?
Well, I've only done it just a little. I mean, I've got 5 little short rows there, but there were kids who, get up and eat some breakfast, and Dad puts a hoe in your hand, and you 5 or 10 acres of corn. And a bigger child, usually a boy, son, or Dad would go through the middle with a horse and plowing out the middle, but you can't get too close to your corn. So somebody's got to come behind, hoeing all those weeds, and then pulling a little dirt up on there. And the standard, everyone I've ever talked to about it said 3 times. You got to do that 3 times, and then your corn is laid by, and you let it go. But that was, I don't know who could do that today, or who would.
Right.
So I don't grow this corn. I buy this corn from, or or I have a cousin who's very generous. He gives it to me, but I wouldn't. If I grew it one time, and if I had to grow it, I'd be eating right off of the shelf up there at the local store. But people grew it, and I'm sorry, I'm chasing rabbits. I hope someone can follow me. But this fella told me that people began to grow yellow corn in a commercial way using tractors, and because they were growing more than they could possibly hoe, they began to use sprays. They began to use herbicides. And he said that he thought that it was his thinking. This is not scientific, but he thought that people were a little hesitant about herbicides, but if they knew it was going to the cattle, they didn't think too much about it, but they were reluctant to make cornbread out of corn that they had sprayed for themselves. So anything like that, it never happens overnight. There are always factors that contribute to it that we don't even think about today. It's got roads, everything influences people's decisions. So people just stopped doing it, and there were still a few people doing it in the 90s. There could be someone in Floyd County who still does it, but if they do it, they have to grind it themselves, because you can no longer take your own personal corn to a commercial mill and say, hey, grind this for me, and I'll give you 1/8, because millers, they can't risk, they don't know what's in your corn, and they can't risk some contaminant. There's so many laws about those things, and they're good laws, they're important, but they do, as with everything, a few people mess it up, for everybody. So you just, if you don't have a way to grind it yourself, then there's no use to grow it.
So this is a real part of our history that you're keeping alive by doing that. And is that maybe part of the reason you continue to do this, just to keep it going?
Sure. I'm a teacher. I've taught for years, and I like to make people stand and listen to me talk or sit. And but I like machines. I've always liked. I bought that engine there 35 years ago, and then I bought the cart that it's sitting on, and I needed something to do with it. So it cuts wood. It's a wood saw, but I wanted. Then I started reading about these and found one of these, and it's just not much fun to start an engine and just let it run.
Yeah.
I mean, you can burn some gas, and it's kind of cool, but it's more, you feel like your time is not quite so badly wasted if you actually produce something. And so my brother and I, we used to cut wood with the thing, but it's no match for a chainsaw, really. But this is something that everybody, most people like cornbread, and it's a nice, it's something you give somebody, a gift, a bag of cornmeal and a recipe, and it's kind of, I don't know, I just like to do it, and it is silly. The time, this will be 3 days setting it up and all that. But if you had it mounted in a building and didn't have to get all this stuff out, it wouldn't be such a job.
I see.
But I do like to talk to older folks, and I like to do something that pleases. That's got a good memory for people, and for most people, it's a good association.
Yeah, I think so, and I think our people watching at home are really going to enjoy this. So maybe we should fire it up.
Yeah. We'll do that, and I left. I left this off.
So it'll be interesting to see you set
yeah,
it up.
you can decide.
I'd say go
I'll
ahead
show
and
you
get
this
all
little thing right here, a little close up. This is called, some people call it a shaker. I guess its correct name would be a shoe, based on the large horizontal mills. But its purpose is to control, by turning this knob, this little collar goes up and down, and that controls the flow of corn from this hopper, which we'll fill just in a minute, down into this. And it's got a large screen on the top. And that large screen would filter out a piece of a cob or a shuck or something like that. And on the bottom, it's got a smaller screen. And when I rebuilt the thing, I should have used a different, smaller screens, but that screen's purpose is to let things like a mouse droppings or something like that, because as we know, you don't know what your neighbors are bringing to you. So something the size of a piece of corn should stay between those two screens and then come right out here and then drop down into this. And we'll open the thing up in a little bit, and it drops straight down, and as it's dropping, this fan is turning. There's a fan in there on the end of that shaft. When the mill is turning, that fan is blowing a blast of air right through here. And yesterday, my friend said it looked like a turbocharger, and maybe. It blows a little blast of air, and then any pieces of silk or dirt or whatever, then it blows, and it comes out here. And if you look in that, you'll see that if you open too much blast, it'll actually blow grains of corn out. So you have to kind of regulate that. So this is a way, it's a cleaner, basically, what it is. Now, corn, if you buy commercially produced corn today, it's already been cleaned, so you don't have to worry about that. And there's a little wooden flap right there that I can turn, and so that everything that drops through will be fed into, and you're not wasting broken pieces of corn. But my screen is too big, so these pieces of corn, the pointy end gets down and they drop in and clog up the screen. So it's really not even necessary to have the cleaner on there, but that's part of that's a feature of the machine that encourage people to buy it, because, as I said, you don't know, you can't follow your neighbor around and see where he's keeping his corn, and you do what you can to make sure that clean corn's going in. And as we'll see, this thing vibrates and drops the corn into the machine. Yeah. Some people are more interested in the engine.
A lot of people are very interested in the engine. My
Yeah.
grandpa used to run an engine, like you were saying. He didn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
He'd just run it. And I was 10 or so, and I would just think, what is he doing?
Well, that's what a lot of people, very sane, rational people think now. So,
But I think he liked the way it sounded.
well, that's a whole, everything is a story, but the most popular and antique motorcycles, I think, is a Harley Davidson. And definitely the most popular and sought after and expensive antique tractor is a John Deere. Both of them, in their antique forms, are 2-cylinder, and neither one of them is a true, well, it doesn't matter if there's a V, but the 2 cylinders don't fire 180 degrees apart. So instead of going bump, 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 they go bump, 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 bump. My theory about that is it's kind of like your heartbeat. It's got kind of an organic sound to it.
Yeah.
So a John Deere goes pop, 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 pop. And something about that appeals to people. And these things, this one has a kind of an irregular beat, which you'll hear because of it's called a hit and miss engine. And that means exactly that. It hits a few times and it misses. It doesn't miss. It's actually being, there's a governor that causes it to not hit when it's not needed. And I can easily go down a rabbit hole with that. I'll just say that that's purpose. The purpose of that is so that it saves fuel, because, and I'm sure this is too technical, but a few of your viewers will get this. This is the exhaust valve. It's called a rocker arm. And that opens to let the exhaust out. It closes when fuel is pulled in. It's closed for compression, and it closes when the thing fires. What's odd about these is any modern engine has a rocker arm for the exhaust valve, and it has one for the intake valve. This intake valve has no rocker arm. What makes this valve open is the suction when the piston's moving in that direction. So if you hold this valve open, if you hold the exhaust valve open, there's no suction, so this valve doesn't open, so it doesn't take in any fuel. So when you hear it run in a few minutes, you hear it go pop, pop, and then it go, and it's freewheeling, and it's not using any fuel. And in fact, the brand name of this engine the decals are gone, but the brand name of this engine is Economy. And people were tight. Floyd County people, were traditionally pretty tight. They don't wear their money. They don't drive around in it. They got it somewhere in the bank or something. And you know, if they get $1, they keep it. And people really looked for economical operation when they bought an engine, and that was one way to make it use a little less fuel. It's also cheaper to manufacture because, for reasons that, if somebody sees it and wants to know, they can call me and I'll tell them.
Okay.
But I don't want to. I mean, that's going down another rabbit hole. But it gives it a distinctive sound, and
Yeah.
people think there's something wrong with it. That's just the way they're meant to sound. Okay, so we've got this tight. I need to drop this down so the corn won't run in rapidly. I've got 50 pounds of corn over there. I'll go get that. And we've got to put we've got to open this, take this little cover off here. And that's to keep the mice out. And you can see where we ground. The light, I don't know if it'll work in there, but when I turn this, you can see the stone turning in there.
Oh, yeah.
And that stone turns in this direction. And see that little metal bar right
Yeah.
there? That's what flings the cornmeal out. And once, if I haven't talked you to death by then, we'll open the machine up and you'll see exactly how that works.
Okay.
And then this tapered spout fits in there. And I usually put a little paper bag over it, just as kind of a wind, like you put them over your microphones. I put them over the spout there, and that keeps the wind from blowing your cornmeal around. Get the lines up on there, and we turn those little.
It's almost like it was designed for that.
Well, it doesn't. It just fits so nice.
Yeah.
And this thing, of course, is a scoop. I've made that to put things in the bag. But this is something that somebody who sees this program is going to recognize this thing right here. I've seen a handful of these at auction sales in the last 40 years. And you look at it and you think it's like a pallet or something, for a painter or something.
Yeah.
But this is a miller's paddle. And I've been at sales and auction sales, and I'd see one, and older folks would know what it is if they've been to a mill. And it works this way. It works instead of dipping the meal out, millers would make a special box, and then they would drive a couple of nails, like one here and one here, or maybe on the end, and then file the heads off so they have a point. And then you're grinding this corn, you take the sack and you push it down over those nails, and then you hold the mouth open, so you got like a triangle there. And then instead of dipping it, you just take this paddle and you scoop it into the sack with that. And the ends of those things, you feel the end of that where it's worn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget where I got this paddle. I got 4 or 5 of these things. And when we get inside the mill, you'll see it looks like driftwood or something, where it's been abraded by. Cornmeal is actually abrasive.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if you eat enough, it'll wear your teeth out. I don't know. But we'll see that when we get in there. So there we are. This is always the scary part, is when you put the belt on and start the thing up and make sure the belt's going to stay on. And that's why I want to make sure to say again that no one who did this regularly had their mill set up outside. And typically their engine would be a tractor or something like that. And it's easy to move around and get it lined up. But I don't want to delude anybody to make them think that they had to do all this much trouble to grind their corn. It's a lot of work, but it's not like going outside to do it. All right. If you go to a tractor show, you'll see that about any tractor made in the 40s and 50s even has a pulley on the side of the tractor, whose purpose is for a belt like this, for stationary use.
Does the belt stay twisted?
Yes, and now I'll quiz you all. I'll see if you can tell me why that belt is twisted. What's the purpose of twisting that belt, or what's the effect of twisting the belt?
To me, it's because it's too close.
Well, here's the thing. Watch this pulley.
Yeah.
Watch the direction I'm turning this pulley, this flywheel. Can you see? This one's turning this way.
Yeah. And that one's turning the opposite
Yeah,
way.
so it's to reverse the direction of the
So the twist reverses it.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
And that's not ideal because that's the friction
Revving
point.
up against itself.
Yeah, it's not the best. But if you get it on your camera, actually, I sort of think there's a kind of a
Space it a little bit.
it's a sort of an air cushion or something when it's actually moving that sort of keeps them apart. But it's not smart. I mean, it's not the ideal, but that's
So if you
what I've got.
had it straight without that twist, it would be turning this the wrong way.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. Now I could turn the engine around.
Yeah.
But then my belt has to go, there's some things on there that interfere with it. This engine was bought and used for many years to power a mill like this. But it sat in the building, it was bolted to the floor, the belt went straight to it. So this is a...
You've worked this out.
Yeah, and it's a rigged up makeshift thing.
Mm-hmm. Can you see the similarities with Matt? Yeah.
Here's something that some of your folks will know about. It's a miller's knot. This miller's still tying his corn in a sack. And I cannot tie one and show you how it works, but they just use a piece of cotton string. And that knot is made so that we'll pull right out like that. And a miller can tie one of those things like, and I've been shown how to do it 20 times, and I've remembered for 15 minutes, and then I can't do it. But that's something that I have encountered older folks who talk about someone showing them how to do that. And it's fast. I mean, it holds, but it just pops right open. And that's a little bit of novelty there. This is 50 pounds, which is as much as I want to pick up, and I wouldn't want to carry it very far. So we're talking about people carrying about half this over their shoulder to the mill. I've got my little collar down so it won't dump too much corn. It won't let too much corn pass through. And you can see that corn is nice and clean. There's a few little yellow grains in there. Maybe a piece of a cob.
Piece of the cob right here.
Yeah, and this little shoe thing will take that out. But a little bit of cob's not going to hurt you,
No.
It's not going to. This is more fiber for you. So I'm going to see what happens. There's always that moment of, you want to stand back. The belt once in a while will jump off, and I don't think it will today, but it wouldn't be good.
Is the box in a good spot?
Yes, I think so, and yeah, you're in a good spot, and you can, of course, move all around it and get any shot you want once it gets started. So this one, I've got a car battery for the ignition, or for the ignition. Alrighty, now, I had it running earlier, so it should crank, we'll see. Gonna open the fuel. Put the choke on. Now that noise is that intake valve being sucked open by the piston, pulling in fuel. Ooh. There we go. There we go. And then we'll get some corn in there. because we ran it yesterday, it's already got some in it.
So when it's not making sound, the engine, it's not using fuel?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And if you want to get a close-up, you can see that happening. See that the exhaust valve's being held closed, nothing's moving, and the intake valve's being held closed. The exhaust is held open, so it can't make compression, so which doesn't slow it down, and it can't make vacuum, so it's not using any fuel. And it hits and then it misses. But it's really a misnomer to say hit and miss, because it's not really missing, it's just not firing.
And it almost just fires enough to keep this turning. Is
Exactly,
all it needs to.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now when we start putting some corn in there, it'll start firing more often. It'll start working a little bit. You see those grains stopping up the thing. I'm going to try to get some of them out. There we go. Now it'll start hitting a little bit harder now. Hit four times.
Yeah. So it knows when it needs to turn faster.
Yeah, it's got a governor, and I'll just show you how that works. Now pretty soon you'll see a little dimple start to form in the middle of that.
You can see the cornmeal coming out
here.
here.
Yeah, we can take this thing off there.
But I see what you mean. The wind is carrying some away
Yeah,
here.
yeah. And it's this corn flour, the finest part, and then all the way up to this flaky, that's the outer covering. And if this were yellow corn, that would be yellow. That's where the color is at. If it were red or purple or whatever, you'd see that color in it. But for white corn, it's really almost transparent, that flaky. And you could eat that. Some people just bake it just like this because they like the fiber and it's a little bit chewy. But, we sift that out. But
you sift it?
Yeah, you can see those little flakes of, you can see that, the little flake there? And if we sift it a little, there's some of it. You can see it very clearly. So, I've got, I need to get a little more corn going. It's kind of hard to regulate that thing. Now, if we had started cold, there's a knob there you can turn and open, and the stones will separate. It's very important not to let the stones hit together. You'll ruin your stones. So if we were starting up cold, we'd open them up and gradually turn it till it got the grind we wanted.
So you can adjust it if you wanted a bigger...
Yeah. And this knob right here, see, this is a lock. I could loosen this lock right here, and this knob will turn. It's threaded. It pushes the end of that shaft, pushes all that in that direction, and closes the space between those two stones, and that's what determines how fine or how coarse your cornmeal is. And the miller, you'll see them just put their hand in there, and you can feel that. It's pretty coarse compared to what you buy in a store.
I prefer that. I like the texture, like
I like a little tooth to it. I like that too. And that's the thing that older folks will comment on. That's like Dad used to get at the mill or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you can open this thing on up, and if you're trying to do a lot of work, but we're just playing today, so we won't grind it very, very fast. But the engine's running like it should, and the thing on the top is an oiler. You have to grease it and oil it. There's nothing automatic about it, so a lot of steps, I guess.
And so when you're doing this, you're really paying attention to two things.
Yeah.
You got to keep your engine running and your grind's the right size, and make sure this is not getting clogged up.
Yeah. But when it gets, when it's all running right, it's stand back, talk, and have a good time. And that's a sort of not a myth, but a sort of a stereotype about millers that they were people who like to talk. And in England, the reputation of a miller is the person who's lazy, and often a thief. And in the Canterbury Tales, the miller is a really unscrupulous
I remember
person.
the miller in the
Yeah,
Canterbury
oh
Tales.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the tale that's told about him is comical, and he is lazy and deceitful. And for that reason, there are laws passed in Virginia that control how much a miller can charge. So you can see it sort of accumulating there, and notice how it kind of separates itself. You see the flakes of bran here on the side? They just kind of separate themselves as it falls into that pile. And the little black spots, people think, well, what's that? That's just part of the heart of the corn, those little black dots.
So when I buy cornmeal and see that, I feel like, from my limited understanding, I thought, oh, it's stone ground. Like, to me, that
well, it wouldn't matter about stone ground,
yeah.
but it probably is, but it's whole corn.
Whole corn.
You want to get whole corn.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it doesn't say whole corn, that means it's not whole corn. But if it's not whole corn, it won't have that good taste.
Yeah.
It won't have as long of a shelf life. And if you don't care, if you just as soon eat cardboard, then eat, get the kind that lasts forever. But good, fresh, whole grain cornmeal would not have a long shelf life.
Yeah.
Unless you put it in the freezer.
Uh-huh.
See that dimple starting to form in the middle there?
Yeah.
And now it's just kind of standing around and tell lies, I guess.
That's what they did.
Yeah. But if this were, a full-size mill, the miller would have a dozen other things to attend to. So a lot of people, I think, maybe got into milling because they thought it was an easy way to make a living. But and I think I talk about that in the big mill. The talk on big mills is that mills change hands a bunch of times. Because you had to be intelligent and industrious and personable. You had many qualities to succeed in a mill.
So the stereotype is incorrect.
At least in terms of people who actually owned and operated a full-size mill. These I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I'm lazy and I can run this, so maybe it's true. And I like to talk, and it's an opportunity to do that. But the people who actually ran these had more practical intentions than just being social, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So it's cranking it on out there.
I don't see a lot coming here.
Well, that's good. And
that means there's not a lot of...
That's right. If it were really dirty, you can put your hand over that, you can feel that. Let's try a little experiment here. Let's drop a little of this through there and see what happens. See it blowing it out?
I see it, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just...
So if there was dust...
I'll do that again if you want. Will it hurt your camera if it blows right? All right, I'm going to drop a little dab of the meal we just ground through the cleaner just to show how that little blast of air will take out this fine stuff, which could be dirt or something. So we just drop that through. Actually, I never did that before. That's kind of cool.
That's kind of cool.
That works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we can close this flap and adjust the draft on the thing. So you probably wouldn't do that. A little bit. Or you can open it all the way up and it will start blowing grains of corn out eventually. And there are a few.
So that's how you control the strength of the fan.
Yeah.
By opening and closing that.
Exactly. Just like a draft on a stove or whatever. It's got to have intake air.
Yeah.
So we've ground probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 pounds there. And it's going pretty slow.
I went to people making apple butter last fall, and they had a whole carport full of people, and a potluck, and just a big social thing. Yeah.
And that's part of, it's incidental to this in the past, but it made neighbors depend on their neighbors.
Yeah.
Which compels you to have, at least tolerate them,
That's
Maybe
right.
you don't even like them, but you tolerate them because you depend on each other
Yeah,
in some way.
yeah.
And that's unfortunate that we get lost on it.
We don't have as many things in our current lives like that. I'm trying to think of something we have. I mean, when you reach out to your neighbors and say, hey, let me know if you need something.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's trying to think of what's built in.
Well, people, not much, because
Not much.
now everybody's, if you need a tractor, you buy one. And families still have those same sort of reciprocity things, but they're not as common among people who are just neighbors.
Yeah,
And as fewer and as less and less are your neighbors your family. So that breaks down too.
yeah. So more reason to keep the traditions going.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's sort of artificial, but that's better than. People are having a good time. They're having a good time. And
Yeah,
we have invited people in the past, and we do this once a year for several years. And we just kind of got worn out with it. But it was a lot of fun. It wasn't fun the day you were getting ready or the day you were cleaning up, but the day we did it, it was a lot of fun. It's a wood saw. There's a,
oh right, yeah,
Yeah.
you said that.
yeah. I could put the saw on there and show you, in fact. There's a saw blade that goes right on here.
That's where the air's coming out. I
Yeah,
just
that's the
felt
exhaust, yeah. Yeah, I put that there just to get the noise away from us. Yeah, that's the exhaust pipe. That's the catalytic converter there. I'll put a saw blade put on here.
That's pretty cool.
This has a left-hand nut. So most nuts are right-handed. This is left-handed. It tightens, turning it counterclockwise, because if you get the saw stuck in a log or a piece of wood and it begins to slip, it'll tend to tighten itself up instead of loosening. And the nut on this wheel is the same way. The nuts on the other side of the wagon, they have right-hand threads. This was a left-hand, so instead of turning it that way, I turn it this way.
That's for safety.
Yeah, and as the wheel turns, see, it tightens, it just keeps itself tight. And there were a few brands of automobiles actually did it. Studebakers did that, and Chrysler did it until, I don't know, the 50s maybe, but just because it was a holdover from wagon days. But I don't think it really helped anything. But in this case, it does. So there's a belt that would go on that same pulley. Now I'll walk around here, excuse me. And this is a press pulley. It just keeps the belt tight. And that belt comes and turns this. And then you get a piece of wood on there. You need some help, someone to put a slab or something on there. And then this guy over here is pushing it forward, and this guy here, you saw a lot of wood if you got a little help. But there aren't any slab piles anymore. Sawmills all grind them up and make bolts out of them.
Yeah.
Well, we've sawn a whole lot of wood with it, but it's really dangerous.
It looks dangerous.
It is.
Safety.
It makes a cool sound. When you crank that thing, get that thing going, it's zing, zing.
So that goes really fast.
Yeah, really fast. See, it's got a much. See, the pulley here is a lot smaller.
Yeah.
So if you want speed, the driving pulley is big and the driven pulley is small. So that more
makes
speed.
the speed.
Yeah. So that pulley's a 12-inch, I think, and this is about 6 or something. So this saw would turn twice as fast as that mill does. And this was bought from. This was made by Hercules engine company in Evansville, Indiana, but it was sold by Sears. You know, Sears would buy stuff and put their name on it. Sears called it Economy. And this, I've got it jacked up like that because I had wheels on it before when I forgot to call you. And these, of course, should be sitting on the ground. But I already had it jacked up like that, and I didn't want to mess up my alignment, so I just left it. This axle is added so I can pull it on the highway.
Oh.
That's not correct. Are you hearing all that, Paul? People should know that this is an add-on. This and the tongue on the front, I hired a guy to make that for me so I can hook it to my pickup, jack it up, put road wheels on it, and take it somewhere. Because you know you don't want to pull on these steel wheels.
And then you just take these off
Yeah.
when you're traveling.
Exactly. Throw them in the back of the pickup truck.
Yeah.
This originally it probably had a seat for someone to sit and drive horses or something. And it's actually got a tongue that goes to it that you can hook a team of horses to. The engine is made, I think it's a 1919, kind of forgotten. It's 5 horsepower, weighs 750 pounds. 5 horsepower engine today weighs 30 pounds. So it's not a good weight to power ratio.
Yeah.
If NASCAR used those, they'd be going 10 miles an hour.
Every now and then I can see where the belt is. Oh, maybe that's when the engine goes. It
It
jumps.
jerks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a disadvantage to these hit and miss engines. They're full throttle all the time. If it had a true governor in it, it would slowly accelerate and slow down. It would go like that. This one just goes bang bang,
And that makes
and
it jump.
it gives it that jerk, and that's hard. You know, jerks are not good on anything.
So that's not good for the...
No, it's hard on bearings, it's hard on belts, and it pulls things out of a line, and so this engine is not ideal for this purpose.
But it's nice to use things you have.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It works, but it's not
Yeah.
the best. So how are we doing on our corn over there? Still got plenty in there. Oh, I'm going to be running over. I'll go get a bin and just dip some of that out.
Okay.
I think it's okay. I'm going to give that thing a shake and dislodge some of this corn that's accumulated here. I'm going to shake some of that out, and the engine should start working a little bit harder. It's going to increase the feed for a little bit here. Now it's putting it in there.
You got cornmeal on your camera, sir. It's just on the, like right in there.
Yeah. Whoa. More than I wanted there. I'm going to put some belt dressing on it. It's sticky stuff helps the belt.
So it doesn't come off.
Yeah, or slip.
Yeah.
If you start putting a heavy load, it might slip the belt. This is the actual muffler. I just had to turn the pipe that way to clear the belt. But this is the muffler that should be on it.
So that's just the purpose is to make it quieter?
Yeah, and it really doesn't. The pipe is a lot more effective to make it quieter. That's what this is supposed to do. You might want to get a close-up of that drip oiler, the thing on the top, that little sight glass underneath, it's dripped about 6 times a minute, right in here. There's supposed to be a drop of oil coming out of that thing about 6 times a minute. It just dropped there. If you watch that little, so that's how you regulate that's oil in the cylinder. There it went.
And that's motor oil?
Yeah, that's just motor oil. But instead of being collected in the oil pan and pumped back through, it burns or whatever.
Used fresh.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah, and you have to grease everything. And I probably should oil the valve here too. Find my oil can. Here it is. You have to come along and have to oil the valve once in a while. Little oil port right there. And then these bearings, you can oil the bearings in here. Got and then occasionally you just put your hand on the bearing, see if it's getting hot. They shouldn't be getting hot, they'll get warm. Try not to get any in the cornmeal.
Huh.
I need to get a different rag here.
My daughter would love to just stick her hands in
Yeah.
it. Like it would feel good.
Well, one time I was at Ferrum at the Folklife Festival grinding, and this little girl came up, and I don't know what she thought it was, confection or sugar or something. And she just got a handful and popped it in her mouth, and she got it all over her face. And she spit and spluttered, and it wasn't what I don't know what she thought it was, but it wasn't.
No.
That's not what it was. So that's grinding. You turn this knob and it pushes this down, and it raises this little cuff up, and it'll feed more in. And we could do that. You can get the thing done here. Once it starts, you know, it's not much. Nobody wants to watch 50 pounds of corn drop through that thing, probably. Well, they might. That's feeding a little bit faster now. It's hitting pretty regular, 2 times. And if it gets a little more load on it, it'll hit 3 times. I think it hit 3 that time.
So when you hear that, are you imagining what's happening in the motor?
Yeah, well, I know. That's
You know what's
it's an under load, but it's not a heavy load. Now, if you have the saw on there, I'm reluctant to really push it because I'm just playing. But when we're sawing wood, we'll run it pretty hard. And if you have 3 men, one to throw them away, one to saw and one to put them on there, you can make it hit about every time, and it'll start to boil the water. And that you might want to get a shot. That tank on the top is water. That's the cooler. It's not a radiator.
It's open.
Yeah, it's just you just pour water in that, and for that reason, some people think it's a steam engine because if you get it hot, if it's cold weather, it'll steam. But it's just evaporative cooling.
That's just cooling the engine down.
Yeah, that's right. If it were really working hard, that would boil. Put an egg in there and have your lunch.
It's scaring me.
Oh yeah, it is scary, that belt. I think he's watching it though.
He knows what he's doing. I just get nervous.
Oh, well, it's wise to be nervous. These things are dangerous. I mean, OSHA wouldn't fly with OSHA for sure. And the actual mills were dangerous places. People were just careful. If there were accidents. It's running nice today.
It's a rhythm.
Now, it should have, this is something I can tell you, many of them have a sifter mounted right here. And see this thing work? See how that it's an eccentric, how it's doing that? That right there?
Yeah.
The hole in the center of that thing is off center. So when the shaft turns, it makes it do that. So you can mount a sifter right here with a rod that comes out here, and the sifter rocks back and forth, and you can actually sift it. And then the stuff that you're sifting out stays on top of the screen and runs out the end into a box, and then your sifted cornmeal comes out the bottom. And I've just never taken time to make that work, but that would save a lot of time. But I just don't. That would be a good
So
feature.
you just sift it right before you
Yeah.
bake with it?
Yeah, that's, it takes a couple minutes. It would be a huge job to hand sift 50 pounds of cornmeal.
Yeah.
But if you're just doing 2 cups to make a pan of cornbread, and mostly, and my wife mostly does it. She doesn't mind. She makes really good cornbread. I guess she doesn't mind. She does it.
That's part of it, right?
I hope so, yeah. Get all that ground if I can. Don't have anything to feed it to. Okay. That's about the end of it then.
Turning it off. So to turn it off, you just
I
shut off the
turn the fuel off. Oh, you could unhook the spark plug, but it's wasting fuel while it's running down. It's just blowing gas through it. So I turn off the fuel first. And then you've got to turn the oil off. If you forget to turn the oiler off, your cylinder will be full of oil the next time you start. Or not full, but it'll make a big cloud of blue smoke. So
there you have it.
we'll pop it open if you have time to
Yeah, let's
see that.
what's in there.
I'm gonna Oh, well, I don't need to get anything, so I'll just, first thing we'll do is pull this little spout off, and there'll be some really fine, like corn flour, accumulated in there, or that at the back of that thing. So you can see that's the finest stuff
yeah.
is kind of piled up in there. So we'll just put this back in there and sort of knock some of that out. Let's see. I don't want. I guess I would ordinarily just put my hand in and get it out of there, but I'll do better today. And that would be like what you buy in a store. That's really fine stuff.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
That has, I miss the texture if I get it that fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I don't like it to be like cake. And that, that's going to make cake. It's just going to be, I don't know, it's just preference, I guess.
Yeah.
So we'll set this aside, and I'll get a couple of wrenches, and we'll just pull that thing apart. And you can see what actually goes on inside the mill. So I've just got to get those two wrenches. Here they are.
Was that your mom sitting over there?
That's my mother-in-law.
Your
She's
mother-in-law.
visiting from Indiana.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm. She's, I was trying to explain to her what we were doing, and she said, "How old is the engine?" And I told her it's 1919. And she said, "How old is the mill?" And 1923, something like that. And why do you do this? But she's been eating cornbread, so she grew up in Chicago, so she's kind of didn't eat a lot of cornbread
life.
growing up.
Yeah, more different life.
Yeah, but she likes cornbread, and she has decided that it may be worth doing, because she sees how much pleasure I get out of
Yeah.
it. So. She said, if Molly can put up with it, I can too.
There you go.
Which I thought was a good way to look at it. All right, now I think I got do I have maybe a little, hope I got a little something. There we go. One thing about it is it's hard to avoid getting a little grease in things when you're dealing with all this oily stuff. It's kind of
It's an interesting combination of, working with a food product and also working on an engine.
Well, there's an anecdote about a man, and I can't tell you the man's name, but Frank Webb knew the man's name, and he told me, I think it's in the book, about this guy whose engine, this was gasoline, and gasoline has a smell and a taste, if you've ever tasted it, but it doesn't linger, but kerosene does. And I was telling you a while ago that people were after the utterly cheapest thing they could do. Today, kerosene is probably more expensive than gasoline, but it was in the 20s and 30s. I guess it was for whatever reason was much cheaper. So manufacturers tried to develop engines that would run on kerosene, and they have to run hotter. The science of it is beyond me, but they're not nearly as kerosene isn't as volatile. It's easy to explode, so you got to get the engine hot, and it's a hassle. But many, like Ford's tractors and things like that, if you got them hot enough, you could switch over to a different tank, and they would run on kerosene. So there was a man somewhere in Pulley County who had an engine that would run on kerosene, and it never ran right. So he's always fiddling with the engine while he was grinding corn. So his customers, according to this anecdote that Frank had heard and told me, was that you eat the cornbread and you taste it, and it tastes good, and there'd just be this. To me, it would be sort of like goat cheese. To me, there's just a little bit of goat in there, and that little aftertaste. So with his cornmeal, there was just a little bit of aftertaste of kerosene, which would kind of spoil the pleasure of it.
So a good miller has uh, rags in their pocket.
Well, yeah, yeah, and a good miller would have everything done and wouldn't.
Wouldn't need to mess with the engine.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I do, and people, if they see me grinding, they know, maybe there's no kerosene in there, but you might get a little bit of 30 weight something in there. But you got to eat a little dirt before you die, so
Yep.
maybe a little grease too. All right, so this comes off. We got that ready to come out. Just put that right there, and then we got to take. We've got to loosen a little screw right here to get this fan out. We have to go get a different wrench for that. Well, there we go. If you take the fan loose so it can slip on the shaft. There we go. A little flat there. All right, so that's loose. And they're made to come apart easily because you really should clean them out every day. And there were probably some people who might even clean them out between customers if the corn was really, really bad, rotten, not rotten, but bug infested or something. So there's need to take it apart pretty often. This brace is an add-on. It's sort of a design flaw. Just 2 feet, it's like a...
Not enough to hold it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
See, the reason they did it was so that you don't have to... Most of them have 4 feet, and you have to take a screw out over here because 2 of the feet sit on this half. So this is done so that to facilitate taking it apart.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you said, it's a design feature, but it's also a design flaw because the shaking gradually shakes it apart. So I'm going to put that up here, and I'm always on the verge of poking my eye out with that, but if I don't flip it up, it won't come apart. So then we got this big one on the bottom. Whoa, almost got it right there. One-eyed miller. Now, that thing should pop right apart. I'm watching out for that. And there we go. Now you can see
There's the stone.
The inside. Yeah. And you can see here, there's always a little corn that doesn't get ground. It's waiting in there to be augered in, and so there's always a little bit that gets lost.
And so part of putting it away for the season is to sweep all that out?
Yes, absolutely. You got to get all that stuff out, and it'll get bugs in it. If you don't put some kind of a pest strip or something in there, and then you take a paint stick or something, scrape all that out, sift it, because that's good meal. One thing you should feel at Hari is to just put your hand in there, and Fox also feel the texture of that wood right in there that's been abraded by that cornmeal.
Wow.
So someone's eaten all that wood over the years. I guess it's a lot of different people.
I get a little tiny bit of sawdust.
Yeah, that's pine, but it's kind of pretty the way it's abraded that.
Yeah.
You can actually use cornmeal. It's actually used in industrial processes as like a bead, like sandblasting, to soften a surface or something in a real gentle kind of way. So industrial uses of cornmeal. This stone came from Brushy Mountain over between Blacksburg and Giles County. This company was located, the company that made this was and is located in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. But when they began, or at least some part during their production history, they were, I guess you would say, importing stones because there was a peculiar conglomerate that exists over there. It's a sandstone with bits, round little quartz pebbles embedded in it. So you've got something really hard embedded in something softer. So as this thing gets dull, and the man who's sharpening the thing, as those rounded things wear past the halfway point, the sandstone loses grip. So it sort of renews the surface of the thing. And it's really good millstone. Mabry Mill, the stones that they have came from there.
Same thing.
Yeah, and most of the big mills in Floyd County, the corn rock at least, came from Bushy Mountain, up to 48-inch diameter. This stone is 16 inches diameter. It probably weighs, that's going to weigh 100 pounds at least. But those 48-inch stones, like 2,500 pounds a piece.
So someone has the job of sharpening them.
Yeah, and that's a whole skill. That's a whole skill in itself. Today, you could use a pneumatic hammer with a carbide tips, you know, like you would engrave a piece of granite or something. And but traditionally, this is done with a thing called a pick, and I should have thought to brought one out. But this looks like it's like a hammerhead with a chisel on each end. And of course, that doesn't hold up very well chipping stone. But I think the guy who does it would take like a sack of bran or something to rest his arm on, and then maybe brace that arm and lie down, and then so that he could control exactly where that thing hits and roughen that surface. And if this were a stone for a flower, it actually has to have little grooves cut in it. And I think it takes days to do that.
Wow.
So that's a skill that's, I'm sure there are people who could do it, but it's not common anymore. It's rare. But this one was sharpened. Sammy Phillips, who's now 96, is a miller, well known as a miller in Floyd County. He sharpened this for me, 30 years ago.
Wow.
Or more. But I only grind a couple times a year at the most. So you can't even tell it, yeah. But if it gets worn, what happens is you keep having to close it further and further, and eventually these surfaces, the high surfaces, are going to touch. And if you look at this, you see that the patterns of these, I can't tell you the right word, but the grooves go in opposite directions, so it's like scissors. So it cuts as well as crushes. And when those ever touch together, then it just smooths that down just like a piece of granite. It feels like a headstone or something. And it becomes ineffective. It's not doing any work.
Do you have to replace it or get it sharpened?
Yeah, yeah, they can be sharpened over and over and over. I've seen them where this is sunk down into that an inch, where this one's been sharpened an inch, because it's concreted into that. And eventually they get down far enough, but see, this would fit into that, and you could just keep pressing it further in. But this one will get thin, and it maybe eventually crack or something like that. But I just got lucky when I bought this one. It still has, the stone is still that thick. There's many more sharpeners left. This steel band is for two purposes. One, it prevents cracking, because stones have irregular faults. I guess that's exactly what they have, is the faults and cracks. And if you begin to spin that thing too fast, it could come apart. Yeah. So that steel band prevents that, but it's also got this little bar welded on, two of them welded on each side, and that's what flings that corn out when it's spinning. That's what flings it against that wood and abrades that wood. So that's necessary. And the big millstones, like you'd see at Mabry Mill or somewhere, they have those metal bands around them too. I don't think they have I don't know if they have the little paddles on them or not. Something pushes it out. Maybe they do. So,
So we've had a wonderful morning here with Ricky, learning all about milling corn and engines, and we just thank you so much for the time and for sharing your knowledge with our viewers. We really appreciate you.
Well, I hope they'll like it, and I hope they'll go make some cornbread.
Yeah.
Corn is a wonderful food. It's an interesting plant, and it's part of our history. It's something that came from Native Americans. It's a truly Native American plant, and we need to not remember that. I heard someone say, we need to not forget that. I heard someone say to this native guy, he said, is this Indian corn? And he said, it's all Indian corn. So they were like looking at the colored stuff, you know. He said, it's all Indian corn. So we don't think about what a gift that was.
Yes.
And what a wonderful, versatile plant it is. And, I think we should eat more of it ourselves. You know, feed it to beef and have a steak, but eat some corn too.
Eat your corn.
Yeah. Tell corny jokes. So on.
All that.
Yeah.